right, the gang's all here. It is now 6 o'clock on January 28th. This is the regularly scheduled meeting of the Sandwich Board of Appeals. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. I just want to remind everybody that the town of Sandwich updated the microphone system in here, so we don't have the individual microphones, but that'll pick up a pin drop. So keep your conversations in the crowd to a minimum, and when the meeting's over, watch what you say because it'll pick that up too, whether you're happy or not. Oh, okay. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes of January 17th?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. The only thing we have on the agenda tonight is old business, number 24-15, Village Green, comprehensive permit -NSG Village Green -1 LLC. We have in attendance via Zoom tonight, Amy Quessel, who's our town council. She'll be on till 7 o'clock. Judy Barrett and Will Downey from Barrett Planning Group. They are our 401B or 440B consultant. And Shawn Reardon from Tetra Tech. He is the engineer that is representing the town in regard to this permit. And we also have Deb Keller from Merrill Engineering, who's the applicant's engineer. Just to remind everybody, the meeting remains open. I highly doubt it's going to get closed tonight, or I can probably guarantee it's not going to get closed tonight. We're here pretty much just to discuss the recommendations that have been made based on the permits and the applications submitted, the response to those recommendations, and that'll be a discussion primarily between Shawn Reardon, the engineer, and Deb Merrill. And anybody from the board has any questions, fine. We do have a letter from Christine Dennis that have we all received and read it? Okay. She will probably speak at the end of the meeting. We're going to try and keep this meeting to go no later than 8 o'clock, and we'll go from there. But before we start, is there any questions from the applicant or Attorney Fitch?
No, sir.
Okay, then we're good to go. Shawn, I'm going to turn the matter over to you and Deb for discussion based on the letter that you received from her and your responses to her letter.
Sure. So in the way of introductions, my name is Shawn Reardon. I'm a vice president with a large engineering firm called Tetra Tech. We're based out of Marlboro. Actually, the company's based out of Pasadena, California, but I've worked in Marlboro for the last 10 years or so. I do a fair amount of land development engineering, so I'd say about 80%, 70% of my work is working on the applicant side of things. But I also am asked to do quite often serve as review consultant for 40B projects or other projects that are sort of high leverage, contentious ones, just because of my body of experience and my way of sort of handling what can be a tense situation. So I've probably reviewed maybe 60 40B projects over maybe 30 different communities. So I've seen a lot of these. And I can tell you that the work of this engineer I've seen before, and I've always valued sort of her work and their work. On the spectrum of engineers, they're definitely near the top. So I want to make sure that people are confident in the work that they're doing. My role is to basically sort of give you my opinion as a seasoned engineer, and also to sort of answer any questions that the board might have, answer any questions the community might have, and then sort of hopefully just end up with a good design. I'm not here to say no to a project. I'm not here to make reasons why it doesn't work. I'm here to just give you my honest opinion as to whether stuff meets applicable standards, whether it's good engineering design, or whether perhaps something better could be done, or whether something's been forgotten. So to that end, I issued my initial comment letter was after my first review of the application materials. There's about 68 comments. The good news is they responded to most of those comments, and about 39 of them got answered to a point where I don't really have any issues left. About 27 or so are left over. A lot of those left over are just because they really didn't get answered in the first response. The response that came from Deb was just about the engineering issues. So there's still some questions about traffic and some other things that need to get addressed. I think my concerns boil down to essentially 4 issues. One, in all the projects I've reviewed, I've never had a solar project part of a 40B project. I've never had what was an agricultural building as part of a 40B project. So I'm still a little confused as to how those fit in. Not really my role to determine that. What I can say that I'm going to review those components just as if they were, part of the project, whether they end up as part of the project or not. I'm still going to review them to make sure that what I see is gets the input that I have. I've designed probably 45 megawatt solar projects. I've permitted probably 20 in New York. Last time I was calling in the hearing, I was actually on the way back from a 5 megawatt solar project I was doing in Corning, New York. I was at a hearing for that. So I'm very familiar with those projects. The agricultural building or the utility building now, it's just pretty much a standard building. So it's well within my sort of purview and understanding of different projects. So it sort of slots right in there. I'm going to comment on the same way as everything else. The second issue is 40B projects, because they sort of allow you to ignore setbacks and things like that. It ends up being everything gets pushed out. Everything gets pushed close to the property line because that's really your only constraint. So what ends up happening is a lot of the stress that's typically absorbed in that space on the outside of a project on the margins, now there's no space anymore. So all of that sort of collateral issues that come with projects now get pushed out to the very property line. So my number one sensitivity is the landowners that exist on the other side of the property boundary. How do I make sure they're protected? How do I make sure that sort of any potential issues are addressed before they become an issue? Because after the fact, there's usually not enough room to do anything after a 40B project is approved. There's usually so much density that there's no other places left to fix things. So you really have to make sure you get everything addressed. To that end, one of the things I noted was the properties that abut the project on Falmouth Road, there's a lot of parking right there, and there's a lot of activity right there, and next to nothing has been done or proposed to screen the activity on the site from the backyards of those what appear to be residential properties. I don't know if they're sort of quasi-commercial properties, but in my mind, something should get done to at least minimize the impacts that those parking lots and those new buildings will have on those properties. Similarly, on I think it's Burkell Road, that side of the project, they have a large infiltration system that's literally 5 or 10 feet from the property line. Now, typically it's not a big issue, but in this case, it's an infiltration system that's behind a wall, and that wall is higher than the site next to him. So if you can imagine, you have a wall with a large vessel of water behind it that's intended to hold water that infiltrates into the ground. My number one concern is that water doesn't end up manifesting itself on the property next to it that's now 6 or 7 feet lower. So what we've done is we've listed all these comments and several others in our letter. Those are the big ones that still remain outstanding to me, and I'm be looking to work with Deb and the applicant to sort of resolve those issues.
Deb, would you like to come up to the table and respond to Sean's concerns?
Sure.
Welcome.
And actually, before she does, I view this as almost like a legal proceeding where you guys are taking in evidence and making a decision. So everything I do will be in writing. So no, anything that I say that's important will end up in a letter somehow. Every one of my comments gets tracked from its genesis at the first letter all the way to the end. So the comment number 1 on my first letter will always be comment number 1. Comment number 25 on my first letter will always be comment 25. So each one of those will get tracked to closure at some point. And any new comments that are generated add on to the list. So in this my latest letter, I have 3 new comments. So we went from 60 to 71. I didn't restart at once. So the reason for that is I want every issue that I've brought up to have a record of being resolved in some concrete, specific way.
Right, and then Deb's going to respond to those comments in writing to us as well, and we go the next step.
Right, and just an important point, Deb only, so let's say about 20 of my comments had to do with things outside of Deb's disciplined. We're still waiting for those responses as well.
Right. And I'm sure the applicant's aware of that.
Oh, and to add to that, so late this afternoon, we received a draft of the response from the traffic engineer, VHB. We haven't even looked at that yet, but their delay was they've requested certain information on crashes from the police department. They haven't got that back yet. And then they wanted to see whatever the updated site plan was to make and finish. I think there were 15 comments plus some traffic rolled over in the site issues. So some were integrated back up into the site issues. So we have a draft. We'll review that in the morning, and then Deb is still leading that charge of integrating that into the response back to Shawn and Tetra Tech. So, but we got that this afternoon, and that should put us in very good shape. With to drill down to whatever the final issues are.
Okay.
Deb Keller with Merrill Engineers and Land Surveyors. I've worked with Shawn now a couple of times, so familiar with the process. And I received his letter yesterday. We've been reviewed it, haven't fully responded to all of them, but have looked at the comments that he has remaining, and as stated, a majority of them will be addressed through the responses that we've received from the traffic engineer. And we are working to look at the four major items that he's identified up front. I don't have concrete answers, but we're looking to get those in the next couple weeks, I would assume, correct?
What's
right?
that?
Responding to getting the traffic in and being able to address
So
some
to
of
help
these
with that,
remaining.
Deb, the email from Randy,
Yeah,
it finishes up. I'm distributing a working copy of the response to comments. I think it is safe to tell the board that they will see a final response from VHB on the traffic next week. So once we have that, that can then funnel into Deb's work.
Okay. Yeah, no, you had mentioned previously that you like to get everything to us 2 weeks in advance of the meeting.
Yes, yeah.
And we just received Deb's letter on Thursday of last week. So that's why Shawn really didn't have time to look at it. So the next batch, let's get it 2 weeks out before the meeting, so everyone's got plenty of time to look at it, if you could.
Oh, yeah, that was the goal. And then I think Deb finished her letter response on the 16th, which would have been 2 weeks out, but she didn't figure the updates to her site plan.
Yeah, I got it.
So,
Just wanted to bring that up.
but yes, I do like to try to get that in 2 weeks in advance, so everybody has enough time to be up to speed at the meeting today, yeah, or any meeting.
And if I could ask the chair, so a lot of towns are different. Sometimes the ZBA will ask me to engage directly with the applicant's engineer and sort of work through issues. Other times they want me to work through them. What's the preference in terms of the dynamic between sort of my comments and Deb's work? Or like how would you like to see that progress?
I'm totally comfortable with you dealing directly with Deb rather than put us in the middle and going back and forth.
And I would imagine at some point we're going to just say, well, she's going to say that's the best she can do, and I'm going to say, well, yeah, you should probably be doing more. Then it's going to have to go back to the board to
Well,
make
that's fine.
decisions.
That's fine. But in the meantime, to just keep things moving, probably be just more than appropriate just to have you two communicate together.
oh, that'd be great. Now, obviously, as Shawn mentioned, all
Everything's
our responses
documented. Yep.
documented. Yep.
I got it.
Through the chair, I would just add that planning staff is added to whatever email, just so we can keep track of all of it for part of the public record.
Oh, and one thing you wanted me to bring up was just to remember that they need hard copies of everything, not just electronic copies, because that's the rules, and we're trying to keep them with their job description, keeping it, fulfill, check the boxes.
Yes, thank you.
Sure. So I don't know if Shawn you want to go any further, or at this point?
I mean, what I'd like mostly to hear tonight is sort of the issues that you guys are concerned about and the issues that the community's concerned about, because I didn't have the benefit of being here last time. So I can see the things that I see, right, but I don't live in the community and I don't sort of pass this site every day. If there are things that are on people's minds, I'd sure like to hear them. Overwhelmingly, my concern is going to be on the immediate abutters, right? They're the ones that are going to be most impacted by this. So, you know, I'm going to keep harping at the applicant and Deb to do more and more and more to mitigate what is going to be a considerable impact on those properties. I hate seeing unpleasant pieces of a project pushed to abutters when there are other options that are on the project's land that would be better places for those items. Number one, dumpsters. I don't like seeing dumpsters pushed to the perimeter of a project when they could be somewhere else on the project, and the project could assume the responsibility for the trash that accumulates around them. In this case, you know, I brought up the point of one of the dumpsters. I actually misidentified it. There's a dumpster that's proposed at the top of a 6-foot wall that you can imagine if there's trash, it's not going to stay at the top of that 6-foot wall. It's going to blow on the low side, and guess where that low side is? It's on the abutting property. So I'm going to continue to harp on the applicant and their engineers to consider the abutters, because in my mind, under 40B, the abutters lose a lot of leverage because they really don't have any control under zoning. So we got to do everything we can in our design and in our decision making to make sure that we minimize those impacts.
Totally understand. Our goal is to ultimately just do the right thing for this project and the people of the town. So I've gone through your letter, I've gone through Deb's. I don't have any comments now at this point, or any questions that haven't already been solved by you or addressed in your concerns or my concerns. So I'm good there. How about anybody else at the table?
I guess I have some concerns. We've never really had any discussion so far about the design of the project. There's been no discussion about, I think we have 3-story buildings that are 57 feet high. At least one of them appears to be 57 feet in height. It's tough to read on these plans, the figures, but you know, the building is much higher than anything else in the neighborhood and is out of character with the single-family residential flavor of the surrounding properties. In addition to that, I had mentioned the last time we were here, if you were familiar with the comments that were made by the Cape Cod Commission, you told me you were. Yeah. And yet, there's no open space at all in this project. These are 6 buildings that are 6 buildings and then some townhouses on the other side of the street that are completely encompassed for the most part by concrete. And I'm concerned about that. The other concern I have is, and I'm not sure how everything is structured, I don't know whether or not the land upon which the solar array is situated is part of the actual condominium project and owned by the limited dividend entity that is the applicant here. And town council can probably correct me if I'm wrong, but there is a limit on the amount of profit that can be earned by a developer on a limited dividend situation, which I think is 15%, but I could be wrong. And then how does the solar array factor into that? Is it part of the profit that arises out of any lease that may be signed with the utility company, part of the profit of the project? Has it been factored in the pro forma and the ownership of that land? Is it part of the project? Isn't part of the project? Is all of the array necessary to provide the electrical service that is necessary for this project, or is it far more than is necessary for this project? So, you know, concerned whether or not, you know, the solar array is the focus and the housing is ancillary, more or less, to that. So, particularly the 3-story building, Shawn had mentioned its effect on abutters. That largest building in the project is close to residential properties, and it's the tallest building on the site. And as I say, I had trouble reading it. I didn't have a magnifying glass to read the numbers, but it looked to me, like it was 57 feet high.
Yeah, I'm not correcting you on this one, Kevin, because I don't have it in front of me, but I believe we started out with 4-story buildings when we originally had placed buildings on the pond, on the Sandwich Green. We downsized from 4 to 3 and tried to put it more, I don't think they're 57 in height. I think they're 35 to 39, but what I'm gonna suggest to John is that when this is up on video, we'll get all of what the comments you just made, and John is working on kind of the response of what you just kind of rolled through and articulated. So we'll put that in writing and try to explain that.
You know, because I'm less concerned about the engineering, because that's the expertise we've hired.
Right.
Okay? The design of the project, and not only for the benefit of the town, but for the benefit of the people that are gonna be living there. You know, it reminds me of some of the projects I grew up near to when I grew up in the city of Boston. I mean, nothing but large buildings, concrete. That's what it reminds me of, to be honest, you know. In the design of the buildings, Cape Cod Commission did make comment about the 3-story buildings in particular, that talked about how they were designed, the large span of the facade. There was nothing meaningful to break up the facade so that it had less of an impact on any of the abutting properties. So that's a concern that I would have as well, because we've never really gotten into that. The first 2 meetings were talked about the energy efficiency of everything and the agricultural aspects of it, the whole 9 yards, but we've never really had a discussion about the actual design and the location of the buildings and the layout of the project. So and that's sort of why I threw it out the last time, whether you were familiar with that Cape Cod Commission thing. So I thought you might pick up on what I was trying to get at.
For this round, Kevin, just to see my thinking, is I did exactly what you just said. I said, it's in good hands with civil engineer, good hands with civil engineer. Work down those engineering issues, and then as we have the next meetings, cover some of these, some of these other issues that have yet to be addressed. And I, after last meeting and this meeting with the comments from the engineer, we have more guidance as to how to tweak those plans.
But I was also concerned that you wouldn't be spending a ton of money, you know, on a particular design if there are going to be other issues, if you have to make changes based upon concerns that maybe I'm the only one, maybe nobody else on the board has these same concerns. But if you're going to have to make changes to the actual plan, you know, I didn't want you to go too far down the road without being mindful of the fact that there are some concerns that at least I have relative to the layout of the project. And because I wasn't quite sure whether lot 3 that's shown on these plans is actually a part of the overall development, in which event you've got space where you could spread things out a little bit, move some buildings out, get that huge building away from the property line, move it to the interior of the site, you know, or go deeper into the site, you know. But in the agricultural aspect, again, I'm a little bit unclear exactly why that's part of it. But and I know we talked about it early on, but it was over my head. So those are just some concerns that I have, you know, so that I'm particularly not real keen on the layout of what you've got here. We should be mindful of it.
The only other, Shawn, from a public hearing standpoint, there's been a lot of focus on wastewater treatment and stormwater management as well. That's a fair priority.
Yeah, and I agree those should be priorities, right? Because you've got these, it's likely to be a groundwater discharge permit, so all the wastewater generated on site will go into the ground. The good news is that at the size of the project, it's 20,000 gallons per day or so. So it's well above the limit requiring a groundwater discharge permit from DEP. What that requires is a level of treatment. So if you have a residential home, you have a Title V, what's called a Title V septic system, septic tank and a leaching field, no treatment. When you get over 10,000 gallons per day, you are required to add treatment to the system. So that's going to need a treatment plant and some other infrastructure that reduces the amount of sort of bad stuff in the water so that it can discharge into the ground at a higher volume. So the good news is there's something still protecting that's outside of the 40B, the ability for 40B to pollute it, right? So you always have that backstop that no matter what they do, they will need to get a groundwater discharge permit from the state. And that's not an easy process, and it's very detailed and very, meticulously managed. Similarly, stormwater has gotten to a similar point. We don't have sort of like a big heavy permit, but we do have really good design guidance in what's called the stormwater standards and the stormwater handbook. So the rules are well set and well understood. My job is to make sure they're following the rules. And if they follow the rules, I think people should be comfortable in the end that it's responsible. The challenge for me is going to be the stuff he mentioned, which is the layout, the things that aren't, they're engineering related, but they're not mandated by engineering standards and engineering requirements. I agree. It's not a terribly creative layout. It's not a terribly sensitive layout. Unfortunately, 40B doesn't empower me with any ability to change that. What I try to do is try to find other things that don't work, that usually don't work because those other things aren't done well, and try to hammer those things into a point where we get the other things fixed. But your point is perfectly on point. And in particular, your sensitivity to not having them do a whole bunch of other work, it's frustrating because if I ask her to do a whole bunch of work to justify what she's done, then it's more energy into what's already on paper and less ability to change it. I've had several projects where so much engineering has been done that was the answer for not changing things. I'm like, well, no, this is a preliminary plan approval, right? This is not a final plan approval. This is a preliminary plan approval. So I don't need a whole lot of documentation from Deb. If I, as an engineer, and she as an engineer, agree that it can work. The problem is with 40B and with everything pushed to the limits, the standards I have to apply to make sure that it works, because there's so little flexibility, you do have to have some documentation to make sure that it still works. But the stormwater and the wastewater, I'm 100% confident that I can make sure that that's done properly. I think the wastewater right now is kind of in my mind, a non-issue, because what I originally saw had zero documentation as to where it came from. Everything that I've seen in the latest revision makes perfect sense, has a lot of space available to it. Like we're not constrained. It's at a location next to a solar project, which in theory could lose a few panels if the discharge permit couldn't work in the location, and they can't get a building permit if they don't get a discharge permit. So the wastewater has to be dealt with in order to start building anything. So I'm confident that they've got a solution for that that's documented enough to make me confident that it could work. Stormwater is going to be the one thing that sort of, it's a bit of the tail wagging the dog too, because every change on the site manifests itself as a change in the stormwater. But the good news is if we can get close to a workable solution at the density and the design shown, understanding that hopefully as the design gets better or evolves, the total amount of impervious area, the total amount of pavement may come down, then it starts to sort of relieve some of the stress on the site and relieve some of the stress on the infrastructure.
Is there anything that would trigger an environmental impact report?
So when you say environmental impact report, that's sort of a nebulous term.
No, I mean by who does it? The state law.
In NEPA, so there's what's called an environmental notification form. I don't think there's any state action that requires
so it would largely depend upon the traffic report, I suspect, because when you get over a certain number of trips, don't you trigger an environmental impact report?
Yes, but you also need a state permit. So if is Falmouth Road a state road?
In that section, it's considered town.
Yes. So in order for MEPA to apply, you need two things. You need a state action. So the reason MEPA was created was because we go to the state for permits to DOT for one permit and to DEP for another permit, and the two permits would conflict. So MEPA was created to make sure that all the state actions are coordinated. If you don't have a state action, you don't need MEPA. So they could have 5,000 trips, right? But if they don't need an action from the state as it relates to traffic, then there's no MEPA review. I can't, unless they get over 100,000 gallons per day, I don't, in the wastewater, I don't think there's anything going to trigger a MEPA
Just
review.
ask the question. That's it.
One point, a 5 megawatt solar project is far more energy production than this project will need, particularly with the amount of battery storage that's shown on the site. So this is a net power positive creator, yes.
And just to interrupt there, as from the beginning, as we've started, that's a community microgrid, and the information, when you see it through the community microgrid lens, Wildan Engineering, is that size both for the housing and it's sized for the EV chargers, which are now required under the building code. So as you build an EV charger, that's where you need this extra power. So it's not as far over balancing out load and demand first generation. This has been studied by Eversource, Mass Clean Energy Center, and
So is it your representation that the size of the solar project shown with the battery storage shown is sized?
and the EV required by the stretch building code is sized to meet that EV demand of level 3 charges? Yes.
So that none of this energy is being sold outside of this project. Is that what you're telling me?
It's a behind the meter project, and it's behind the meter is on the site. It's just as if you put panels up on your roof at your house.
Yeah.
It's first consumed at your house. There can be a deficit on a monthly basis, and there can be a surplus on a monthly basis, but it's calculated over the total energy need over a year. So there's annual kilowatt generated, and there's annual kilowatt demand. That's been matched or worked with Eversource now since 2017 and 2018. On comment that you had, I think in the first meeting or the second meeting, that as these buildings finalize themselves and parking finalizes themselves, more of that power will be on the roof and will be in a canopy in the parking lot. But to go through the Cape group studies that went on for the past 5-6 years, you had to show them something, which is that layout of the 5 megawatt ground mount. So if you put something on the roof, then the size of that layout can reduce because it's gone up on the roof.
So you're gonna be able to provide us with details so that can be evaluated
Yes.
by any experts that we may have available to us, showing whether Sean can get into that or not.
Yes. Yeah, so it's that, again, there's reports through Wildan and Mass Clean Energy Center that will be updated to address this south side project that we have here.
Has any documentation on the estimated production of the solar project been provided?
Production to here, not yet.
Because, I mean, you show a very specific layout. I mean, someone has designed this facility with placement of your panels. There is a revenue generation model for this layout. If you could provide
Anything in affordable housing is a revenue generating model. The starting point of this area in a lot of Barnstable County is there's inadequate infrastructure as a starting point. So back over where I like to be near Boston, all the infrastructure's in the ground. Down here, even the cabling of the wires is now under a massive capital improvement project that Eversource was just allowed to build out all of Barnstable County and Cape and Islands to put in transmission distribution because the distribution lines are inadequate. So even though that's sized and it looks like it can be sold to the grid, the lines that are the distribution lines running from there up to the substation at Kai's Way, you can't move the power on those lines to that substation.
And do you have the report from the utility on that?
Yes.
Can you
Yeah.
provide that to the board?
I can provide it to the board. Again, I was hoping to provide it to the engineers, because I didn't know 5, 6 years ago what this was all about, but I do now. And I wanted to get it into a format that the board could understand, rather than all the crap that I had like we submitted in wastewater. Once we got all the wastewater stuff kind of consolidated and through Deb, it made more sense when it made its way to you. It's still in this format where there's pieces here, that need to be consolidated to a nice clean report that the board can understand, and then that the engineers can review and comment on. But it's always been designed since the beginning as there's inadequate electrical infrastructure, there's inadequate water infrastructure. How do we build adequate infrastructure so that the affordable housing can be built in that area? So it's a balancing act, and we're not married to a 5 megawatt ground mounted. That's just what went through the study, so Eversource could understand what needed to be on those distribution lines if and when it was ever built.
And that was one of the sort of the triggers for me, identifying it as something other than a targeted for use solar project, because the 5 megawatts is the limit on the SMART program. So it's like,
That's why they designed, I can tell you, I agree with you. That's why the engineering firms designed it to the limit of the SMART program, because they wanted to get something in front of the review. And that review started in 18 and it only finished last summer, like the solar projects at the schools and the golf course. That was in the same study, and it took 5 or 6 years as they studied the transmission and the distribution lines, and everybody from the engineering, the electrical side, just sat on the back. So it's only been really now the last 3 to 6 months where you could redefine what a microgrid should look like to support the need for the electrical need of what's on that project or on that property.
well, maybe what we could do is if you have a bunch of documentation that you're just questioning whether or not it's understandable or valuable, if you just throw it all to me, I can sort of wade through it and then pull out stuff that might have value to being in the record. I will then ask you to submit that, and then I can include that in my review. I won't review anything, or I won't comment on anything that's not part of the record of the submittal to the board.
Yeah.
But what I can do is take a pile of just what could be junk, sift through it and say, oh yeah, this is valuable to the discussion at hand. Please submit this. Then I have the information that I can use to communicate to the board if I have any concerns or if there are issues that I feel are resolved.
And just to add to this conversation, because it comes up in your response, and it also comes up in the question when we were going back and forth on parking back in July or August. We were done with this congested parking area that you're commenting on tonight. We were done with that. When the stretch code changed, that projects now had to have 20% of a parking area be EV ready, that's when we designed the 56 parking spaces just to cover that stretch code EV ready section. So that's why those 56 units are up, basically co-located with the power generation and the storage, so those EVs could be available to charge under the stretch code. So we're over, required parking, we're over by 60 or 70 parking spaces, right? But it's that balancing act of, if I remove X number of parking spaces in that area that you don't like there, and I move them and co-locate them with the EVs, now you're opening up more open space, more green space in the middle of the housing units, and you're co-locating it with the generation and the charging. And again, it's different math if you're using level 2s, if you're using level 3s. I drive an electric car. Those level 2s are useless, so I like level 3s, but level 3s use a lot more power. So there's some balancing act inside there of balancing demand with generation. And that's what's kind of in the backdrop. And this is a conversation I didn't expect to have tonight, but that's what is kind of been left to.
Right, and we've talked a lot about the energy aspects of this
Yeah.
thing, and that's where most of the focus has been.
Right.
But as I say, my concern is, if I were living there, you know, I wouldn't want to be surrounded by concrete. And if I had to walk a couple 100 yards to get to a charging station, so be it. But I don't want to sit there in the middle of, you know, a complex that I'm surrounded totally and completely by concrete. And some of these are 2-bedroom units. You're going to have families that are going to be moving in here as well. I don't know whether there are any 3-bedrooms.
There are,
Yeah.
as required under the permit 40B,
So, I mean,
10% of them are.
And there needs to be some recreational space for children that are living in the complex and that sort of thing. And I guess then, if all the energy that's being generated by this grid that you're creating, or the solar array, then I'm assuming the limited dividend entity is gonna own the property upon which that solar array is placed.
Correct, yeah. And it also, just added to, because you did bring up the financials, is that once you put that capital improvement in place, now you have an asset that is owned and operated by the complex. So you fixed your energy cost over the next 20 years, as opposed to the typical solar project you see. That's just that's a for-profit, and there's an escalator going up with rates all the time. By owning and operating the renewable energy, you're able to fix long-term operating costs of the properties, and in theory, keep rents lower, because you can only pass through the.
So then these solar panels, et cetera, are gonna be owned rather than leased.
Correct, yeah. Yeah, this is not being sold to, like, most all of them are being sold to third-party operators. This is all part of the environmental, carbon, water, all those smart growth, smart infrastructure conversations of how we try to address the insubstantial infrastructure is all financially, they're connected. Like, you couldn't do the housing without infrastructure, and infrastructure costs, is a word I can't use, I can get on the recorder, but the infrastructure costs a lot of money. So you're constantly trying to play this balancing of how do we put the most efficient, renewable infrastructure systems in place and balance that off with the needs of what that housing development, affordable. And that's been a historic problem of trying to develop property, is the owner developer has these beautiful plans to do a development, but then they get the sticker shock of all the infrastructure costs, whatever that is. This is an attempt to get the sticker shock of pay for all your necessary required infrastructure so you can create the affordable housing.
But are these units all for sale units, or are they all leased, gonna be leased?
These are leased right now, yeah. And when I say right now, you know, the markets change all the time. There's a lot of pressure from the state that they prefer to see for sale units, but the financial underwriting community wants to see rental.
I don't wanna get too far in the weeds, we've already gotten there, but that raises other questions as to how the profit is determined, that sort of thing. If you switch from a lease arrangement to a sale arrangement, who keeps track of that, and how does all that work?
Right.
Let's not get into that right now.
No, and as you can tell, both of us could go way, way, way down into the weeds. We've been doing it way too long.
But as currently constituted, this is a rental property.
Correct, yeah.
Just one more question regarding the solar. So you mentioned Wildan's going to be doing the engineering on it. So does that mean the solar field is, the size of it is still out for debate? He's going to do calculations on the demand of the subdivision and then determine how big the solar field needs to be based on the buildings and the EV charging?
Yeah, but so Wildan was our original electrical engineering firm back when this started. All the engineers from Wildan have now gone to, regular jobs. So they don't work for Wildan anymore. We have an electrical engineering firm, Hurricane Hill, and they've been working on the engineering with us now for 4 or 5 years, Deb. So they'll be, the reports that we had were from Wildan. You'll be getting reports from our energy company and Hurricane Hill.
Regardless who's doing that.
Yeah.
The goal here is to assess what the demands are of the site and size the field accordingly. So that size could change based on their determination.
Yes. Yeah.
And just to go on what he said, so the site owner is going to own the solar field, is going to be selling the energy to the tenants, correct?
It doesn't quite work that way, but basically, yes.
Okay.
But that's where the behind the meter conversation comes into. The tenants are still gonna have to have a meter and a contract with Eversource.
Okay, because for the distribution offsite, I guess, for that will be, because that's, if everything is, if you have a microgrid, they're gonna have a contract with Eversource for energy to come on the site?
The housing has a contract with Eversource to bring energy on site.
Yeah, but the individual tenants will as well, you're saying?
Yeah, and that gets the power to the house. But once you have a meter, now you have the power that brings down the cost of your meter.
And do you anticipate allowing public access to the EV chargers, or is it just going to be for tenants only?
I see this just being the tenants only.
Okay, thank you. One question on one of the comments you had, 42, regarding traffic. And you had mentioned if it exceeded 1,000 vehicles, it triggers something that is familiar, the LUHPPL.
So land use with a higher potential pollutant load.
I didn't Google it, but I'm sure I would have found it.
It means if you have a lot of cars parked in one location, the stormwater runoff from those parking lots has a lot of pollutant in it, so you gotta pay attention to it.
You had determined that it wouldn't apply here.
Right.
Could you just briefly comment?
Yeah, so they pointed me to a point in the traffic study that the text of the study didn't speak to the average daily trips, but in the appendix to the traffic study, it showed the average daily trips for the peak would be on a Saturday of 648 trips. The threshold to be considered a LOPL is 1,000 trips, so I was pretty confident that they were below that number.
Great, thank you.
Just one, before we move further, I just wanted to check, Amy's only going to be available for 10 more minutes. Amy, do you have any questions or comments to make?
Thank you. No, I am good right now. I will be looking into Kevin's question regarding the profitability and how the solar array plays into that. It generally under 40B, the profit is 20%. And so we'll have to figure out, I'm going to look into how the solar plays into that.
All right, great. Judy or Will, you have any comments or questions for anybody?
Not at this time, thank you.
Okay,
Me neither, thank you.
all right. Any other comments or questions from the board or Kevin? Nope, good. Okay, so, Mr. Cleary, I think Kevin's made it clear, and I think that's important to all of us, that you should, I'm sure you're looking at seeing if you can move things around to make it most amenable for the neighbors and the people that'll be living there. I know it's, a design change, but that's what this discussion is all about. So I think when we see you again, at some point, you need to get some open space in there, whether it be a playground or whatever, and make it as amenable as possible to the abutters, the neighbors, and the people that are going to be living there. All right, no other comments? Oh, go ahead.
Question of the
Sure.
applicant. You're currently contemplating a fixed tilt system? So right now, the panels are oriented south. Everything we do nowadays is tracker panels. So I didn't know if that was still the vision or whether that's part of the evolution of the project.
So, again, 17 and 18, everybody was looking at fixed panels. If you were to go over to 20 Industrial Boulevard, where we started out with fixed panels, we did 3 tracking systems at that property. 20 Industrial Boulevard, in the Barnstable Industrial Park. We put 3 tracking systems in there. So I'll get a better answer to that from the, the engineering people, but you get more annual generation with the tracking, right?
And just so people understand is, originally, most solar projects were just panels that just were stuck on the ground and just stood there, right? Faced the south and collected the sun as it came. The rows are all oriented east-west so that the panels can face the south and get the most sun. Now, what we're doing is we're running the rows north-south, and then the panels rotate with the sun. So in the morning they're facing the east, and then as the sun goes across the sky, they face to the west. The nice thing about that from a design standpoint is the density is much lower. You have less footprint and less.
And that's what I was trying to say, is that if you are using these trackers, then your annual production off the trackers is larger than the fixed panel, which leads to.
Or you can produce the same amount of power in a smaller footprint. So rather than produce more power in the same footprint, I'd rather see produce the same amount of power in a smaller footprint.
Yeah. Plus, you were talking about having systems above the parking areas? Is that?
Well, yes, so
if that were the case, then you wouldn't need all the solar panels.
correct. So the more you put on the roof, now you don't need, now you don't need that.
Just so that I'm gonna understand.
And then you can do, and the bylaw has it now, that if there's a parking surface, you can put a regular parking canopy. So just like, not that, I didn't want to get into it back in July or August, but yes, as you create the space, then you have other places to put the panels. When you are entering into that conversation back in 17 and 18, you didn't have even a location of where any of the buildings might be. So you had to show them that 5 megawatts somewhere, and we showed that general area. And the layout right now adds up to 5 megawatts, but something goes on the roof, something can come out of that layout. And, just to add, because there's a lot of conversation about the 10,000, the roof. That's a 20,000 square foot roof over the wastewater, utility, agriculture space. That roof was designed and sized so 250,000 kW AC could go up on that roof. So subtract that roof out of the 5 megawatt ground mounting because it's up on the roof. Just to give you, a little bit of an example.
All right, I'm going to open the matter up to the public for comment. We might as well start with Christine, since she had mentioned that she'd like to speak. So if you'd like to come up, we'd be happy to have you.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for allowing public comment. Chris Dennis, I live on Epson Drive. I am the founder of the Friends of Peters Pond and also the current president. I sent a letter to the board this week to inform them of a recent local pond study on Mashpee Wakeby Pond and how this report's findings agree with the geohydrocycle and Cape Cod Commission reports on the direction of groundwater flow. In all the reports, the groundwater flow direction starts at the top of the Pompanesett Bay watershed. This is actually near Quaker Meeting House Road, and it travels in a south-southeasterly direction. In the geohydrocycle report on page 16, there is actually a graphic that shows the proposed leach field for this Village Green development, and red arrow lines showing groundwater flowing from a south-southeasterly direction into Peters Pond, Pimlico Pond, and Wakeby Ponds. With regards to this knowledge of groundwater flow and the peer review reports that we've all been provided with, I have 3 concerns that I would like the board to take into consideration. For starters, Ms. Keller, in number 49 of her reply to the peer review, explains that the wastewater treatment plant will now be a, quote, vacuum collection system with a dosing chamber and a leach field, and then goes on to just say that the further design will be completed under the groundwater discharge permit. I feel that this is not enough detail with all of the wastewater problems that we're having here on Cape Cod. Cape Cod is unique land. We are sitting on a sandbar, and the way our water discharges through the sand is very different from the rest of the state. I think this is kind of a high-fly explanation for an important wastewater system. I would like this board to request more information from the applicant on their wastewater treatment plant designs, as there are multiple receiving water bodies that this will impact. And there's also an intermunicipal agreement between Sandwich, Mashpee, and Barnstable that this board has to satisfy. My second concern is the intended use of the utility building. Mr. Reardon summarizes on page 1 of his peer review response from yesterday's letter that the now utility building is oversized for the size of the wastewater treatment plant that they're proposing. I'm worried about the real use of this building. Are they planning a larger wastewater treatment facility for an additional development on this property? If so, I think we should know that. And my final concern is the solar field. This solar field requires 33 acres of land to be completely cleared of all trees and vegetation. The environmental impact, which was mentioned to us by Scott Horsley, scientist at a previous hearing that we were here for, he stated that when it rains, the amount of nitrogen and nutrients will no longer be absorbed by the trees and vegetation. This rain will now be runoff that seeps into the precious groundwater. In fact, if you have had a chance to walk this site today, you'll see there is runoff and washout from the 9 acres that they have previously clear-cut on their own accord a few years ago. These are real environmental impacts. Clean water is everything. I would like this board to request more information on wastewater design, find out why the agricultural utility building is so large, and what is the true objective of this large-scale solar field. I hope you'll discuss these in depth before granting any waivers. I appreciate your kind and thorough attention to these concerns, and I want to thank you for your time.
Thank you. Is there any other member of the public that would wish to speak tonight?
Our attorney, Dennis Murphy, is here, and I had emailed that he would like to have a chance to comment.
Sure.
Sure.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board. I'm Dennis Murphy. I'm from Hill Law in Boston on behalf of the Peters Pond Association. I'm a lawyer, so I'm going to talk to you about the law. Mr. Corain, you had a question about MEPA and whether an EIR would be required. To Mr. Reardon's point, an EIR might be required based on certain thresholds. Often there is state action in a 40B. If this board's comprehensive permit decision is appealed to the Housing Appeals Committee, that is a state permit. So that would trigger MEPA review either under an ENF or an EIR. And that really brings me to a comment that I made early on that I want to repeat. and it has to do with the segmentation principle. Segmentation is when you develop one parcel of land with a specific project, but you leave things like curb cuts and extra capacity in the wastewater treatment system for another development on adjacent parcels. When you do your environmental analysis, whether you're a zoning board or DEP or any other review agency, the principle in the law, codified in MIPA and elsewhere, is that you're not allowed to segregate different projects. If they're going to be developed and they're going to be adjacent to each other, then, for example, we talked about the Luppel. If there's a second project and the number of trips puts it over 1,000, it's a Luppel, and it has to be evaluated that way and designed that way. In the same way, if it's a MIPA trigger for an EIR based on any number of thresholds that have to do with stormwater and wastewater, the amount of clearing, all of that stuff, then you can't segment the property and just myopically focus on what they want to permit when they're telling you in their plans that they're leaving curb cuts for future development on an adjacent site. So to me, that was one of my first comments you ever heard from me in the big building last year. It remains unresolved. And I think that's something that we really have to get to the bottom of. What else is going on this site? Why so much solar? Why such a big building? Why are you leaving these curb cuts? Because you can't begin to focus on what they want to do for this particular project until you understand what the grand plan is for the entire site. So that was one legal point I wanted to make. The other is a legal point about the building permit that's already been issued for this agricultural building. One of the meetings in the other location, your building inspector attended. And I don't know that he has formally rescinded that permit, but
It expired, isn't it?
The permit has expired.
okay.
So it's a moot point.
It is, but we now know it never should have been issued because it was issued for a use that we now know was not truthful. It was bogus. It was issued for an agricultural building, which your engineer is now telling you is actually a wastewater utility building.
Well, we have to believe the applicant had
Oh,
the
I'm-
intent of putting an agricultural use.
Yes,
there.
but fool me
If we're
once.
not doing it now, then we start again.
Yes, Mr. Chair, my point is that there shouldn't be permits out there that allow something that we now know is inconsistent with the factual record that's in front of it.
As we just said, the permit's expired.
I'm glad to know that. The last legal point I wanted to remind the board is that, as you just heard from Christine, there are 3 ponds that are downstream of this project site. I know for sure that Peters Pond has a TMDL. TMDL, total maximum daily load. That is an official designation that limits how much nutrient loading can be introduced into the watershed. Now, they might try to suggest that you don't have to worry about that because it's an issue for the groundwater discharge permit folks at DEP. That's not the case for 2 reasons. One, as Christine just mentioned, the town and 2 other towns are subject to this intermunicipal agreement. I have a copy. You can get advice from your own attorney. It says what it says, and it imposes legal binding limits. One of the hearings, somebody from another town, Mashpee, I think, came and told you, please enforce the agreement.
I would imagine we would condition this permit on the fact that they would have to comply with it.
Yes, but how to comply? And the compliance comes in on the nutrient loading. And that's where the request for additional information comes in, because you can't begin to do an analysis, to your point, about what the scope of the project is, how many bedrooms, what the actual flow should be, until you know how much phosphorus and nitrogen are available to introduce into that watershed under the TMDL. That's what TMDL does, is it puts a limit on the total maximum load of nutrients that can be introduced. So that, to me, is a major issue that the board will have to review. It has legal ramifications because of the status of the TMDL. Not to get, with the revised regulations on the Cape, the TMDL limits are now legally binding. You have CLF to thank for that, the Conservation Law Foundation, a case that was done. So just to be clear, segmentation, I think, is still a major issue. The nutrient load to the watershed under the TMDL is still a major issue. The last point, I raised this once before. I, like Mr. Reardon, do a lot of these 40Bs. I've probably done hundreds at this point. I'm not aware of any single one. I sat on my own zoning board for a decade. I did at least a dozen 40Bs. I am not aware of any 40B that includes solar as part of its permit, not one. So I would just be sure you're on solid ground if that's the direction the board is going to go in. Thank you.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Kevin.
Are you suggesting that we could turn this permit down based upon speculation on what they might do with the other property?
Well, I wouldn't suggest that you could turn it down on speculation. You could say, for example, we don't have authority to authorize solar.
I'm talking about the curb cuts and the other things you're talking about potential future development on some of the open space that's still left as part of the ownership group that owns this land.
Look, the truth will come out, and I think the information...
I don't think we would have the authority to turn this project down. We have to make a decision based upon what's before us. I don't think we can turn a project down based upon what might happen, 5 years down the road.
Well, I think that you have a right to consider the...
You can ask the question.
Yeah, and look, I'm not making this up. This is not speculation.
And I'm not suggesting you are.
These are elements, factual elements on their own plans. Their own plans say curb cut for future development. So that information, while the design team may not think the board's entitled to it, I'm telling you, you are. In fact, you have to consider it, or you're segmenting the...
So if they come to us and they say, okay, we're going to build another 100 units on the remaining open space, we can't turn this project down because they may build 100 units on the adjacent space.
No, you can't. I'm not suggesting that. But what you can do is give that information to your peer review engineer, who then can consider it, whether that triggers the LUPL, for instance, or whether that triggers some other design review that isn't triggered by the current project. So I hope that answers your question.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Yes, sir. Please state your name and your address, please.
Peter Barlow, 1 Peggy's Lane.
Thank you.
I'm a civil engineer as well, and I did review some of the plans, and looking at the stormwater, it looked pretty interesting, but I was curious about the rainfall intensity, because we know that we're getting a lot of rain because of new storms that are coming in, based on the weather patterns we're getting now from El Nino and El Nino and all. What I looked at, a 3-year look back for rainfall intensity in the immediate area, and I was looking at 2.5 inch rainfall for 3 hours in North Falmouth. So they were looking in their design plans at a 24-hour event for 8 to 8 inches. I think we've got to look at a much larger amount of rain in a 24-hour period because of global warming for the stormwater. On a second note, you have pumps pumping the sewage. Is there any backup for that? You're saying you got solar, okay, but is there a backup for that? Is there a generator or something to kick on in case it dies on you? So that's something that's not mentioned in the plans. There's no backup at all. And the residents would be in a very difficult situation if they couldn't flush the toilets. And then the wastewater issue. It's to be determined by others. My understanding, as was previously mentioned, when you're reviewing a plan, you're reviewing everything, including wastewater, and not done later. So you guys should be reviewing the wastewater as well as the development at the same time.
Well, until we get everything from the applicant, as Shawn is looking for, and us as a board are looking for, it's a moot point. We'll have everything together.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, would you like me to sort of respond when I can, or?
Yes, please.
So on Peter's comment about the rainfall intensity, absolutely he's correct, right? We are getting much more intense rainfall currently than we did 20 years ago. The issue at hand is we have what are called the stormwater standards in the Massachusetts Stormwater Handbook, which is a 250-page document that says, you know, more than you would ever want to know about designing stormwater management systems. That document says you have to use what are called the TP40 rainfall events. So you are told what rainfall graph to use in your analysis. The good news is, you know, I mean, we're talking about rainfall events that are sort of nebulous to begin with, right? That there is no such thing as a 100-year storm, right? It's a statistical storm defined so engineers like me and like Peter can solve problems with finite answers. So the answer is they use the numbers that they're required to use. When we have the dialogue between the engineers, we certainly consider, okay, where are things trending and does your design affect that? The first thing I want to know about a stormwater system is, okay, what happens when it doesn't work?
Gotcha.
What happens when it overflows? Where does the water go? If it's going to go somewhere, I'd rather go on your property than on somebody else's property. So those are all conversations we're going to have. Okay. But to Peter's question, we are required to use certain rainfall intensities to meet the standards. Doesn't mean the board can't then say provide additional information that uses NOAA or some other Cornell numbers. Those are higher values, but the design doesn't change terribly much, but it's within your purview to say, no, in your permit, if you issue one, you must design the stormwater system to meet the current, you know, NOAA standards or the current Cornell numbers. And then they'd have to, in complying with your decision, when they do their final plans, they'd have to design a stormwater system that met those limits.
Okay.
Has their stormwater plan taken into account the issues that were raised by Horsley and Witten relative to runoff from the solar and all the clearing that has occurred in order to locate the solar? And if not, shouldn't we have that? And shouldn't that stormwater management plan include a mechanism for removing nitrogen from any runoff from that area?
The answer is the stormwater standards don't deal with nitrogen sort of treatment losses through reducing vegetation. It's just not part of the standard. It's very difficult to quantify sort of what that loss is, what that pollutant is. There's no nitrogen generation on the project, right? The project is not sort of a pig farm or something like that. So there's no real convenient mechanism there. The other thing that was brought up, Dennis brought up the TMDL issue. We did look in that briefly because our first concern was where this is located. It's got all these ponds that have TMDLs. We found out that a couple of TMDLs, like on Peters Pond, is a TMDL based on mercury in fish scales or fish bodies. So it's not a traditional, usually when we see a TMDL, it's usually for nitrogen or phosphorus or something like that that's attributed to stormwater. A lot of the TMDLs in this area are for other things that are not stormwater related. So we just got to be careful that we don't sort of jump to conclusions on those matters.
So I'm assuming our local Board of Health must be the one keeping track of the development that occurs and what impact, if any, it has on that tri-party agreement that we have with the other two towns.
Yeah, I don't want to say who's responsible for.
We probably ought to find that out.
We can have Amy take a good look at that. She's not.
Leanne.
Our previous director for the Board of Health, David Mason, is now our wastewater consultant, and he is the one that keeps track of that.
Oh, okay.
We should probably get some input from him.
All right. Any other member of the public wish to speak or have a question? Yes, ma'am.
Susan Perry, 21 Shore Drive. I have a question about the traffic report, the traffic study. When was that done? What time of year and what year?
Deb, would you like to speak to that?
I honestly don't know the answer to that.
So during August, they tested the traffic on Route 130 and whatever other areas that they put their
What year?
meters down.
What year?
This summer, this
August
August.
2024.
Yeah, yes, yeah. And his initial report was probably November, December. And then that went through the peer review. And his most recent updated report was just this afternoon. But as far as traffic counts and crashes, they did that in August of this past summer.
Thank you.
With regards to that, did the traffic engineer ever sign that report? I mean, that was an issue a couple of hearings ago in October, that the traffic report was not signed by a traffic engineer. And I believe Mr. Fitch said that he was going to find out that information and make sure that that traffic report was signed.
Well, we'll require it to be signed, so whatever we get will have to be signed by the engineer.
Do we have a traffic engineer? I mean, I don't.
VHB, Van S. Hagen, Breslin, one of the largest companies.
Yeah, and VHB was the applicant's engineer. Our traffic engineers reviewed the report as well. So everything except the traffic comments, all the comments that are not traffic comments are my comments. All the traffic comments are from our traffic people. So Courtney Sudak, who's done dozens of these projects and dozens of projects for Mass DOT and other municipalities. She's a very competent and thorough person, so you can feel confident that even if the engineer doesn't sign the report, everything that's included in the record will get addressed to its conclusion.
Okay, thank you.
And one of the things that she noted was that their traffic their traffic volume numbers were collected and adjusted based on Cape Cod Commission guidance and the Mass DOT's transportation guidance as well. So everything they did was fairly consistent with accepted principles.
Okay. Anyone else?
Mr. Chair, can I offer one comment, please?
Sure,
Judy Barrett.
Go ahead.
I should have said this sooner, but the comment came up earlier about having some type of open space amenity on the site, given that you're talking about 140 odd apartments. And I think it would be great if the board would provide some direction to the applicant about kind of what's expected there. Often what we see in these cases is the developers who don't put any thought at all into their site plan about amenity space come back with something that's fairly token, a small space to throw a picnic bench or something. And I think it would just be great if we could maybe not have to go through multiple iterations of conversation about what's adequate open space on the site, and make it clear that we're talking about some really viable play space for kids, as well as outdoor space that's appropriate for adults. I'd like to see something more than just a tot lot.
Okay, I understand, and I think Kevin and I agreed and made that clear, and they're gonna work on it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And to Judy's point, I think the current plan is a bit bereft of that thought. There's opportunity out there. I mean, you've got a large solar project that even if you just incorporated a walking path around it, there just really didn't seem to be much of an effort to sort of that.
Okay.
You've also got a significant lot on the rear side of the townhouses, large piece of property on the rear side.
There's definitely opportunity there.
Okay.
And there's that swimming, you remember the people who are gonna swim off the tree into the pond? There's that open space too.
I don't recall that.
Yeah, I'm joking.
Jokes don't come through on the transcript.
Anyone else want to speak? All right, Sean, appreciate your comment. I just need to, Leanna has to speak to when the next available date is.
Yeah, so we do have a couple scheduling issues coming up. February 11th is the next board hearing. It's already a packed agenda. And then we move into some missing board members. So February 25th, we don't have our chair, nor do we have Kevin. So we wouldn't have quorum. Then moving on to March 11th, we could potentially meet. We won't have our chair, but we would have 4 members if you were amenable to March 11th. Or if you wanted a full 5-member board, we would have March 25th.
Okay. March 11th.
Yeah, March 11th.
March 11th.
Or to do March 11th. So with March 11th, we have extended the extension of time to March 12th. If you would be amenable for
Sounds
30
good.
days of an extension, just in case, God forbid, anything happens the day before. So a 30-day extension would lead us to April 11th. So it will be a motion to continue to March 11th here at Sand Hill School, 6 p.m. with an extension of 30 days. That's okay.
Okay, I'll make a motion to continue the public hearing to March 11th, 2025 at 6 p.m. at the Sand Hill Community School, Sandwich, Mass., and allow for a 30-day extension of time to April 11th, 2025. We have to vote, so motion is you seconded, and then we all vote. Chris, yes?
Chase, yes.
Jim, yes.
Kevin, yes.
Okay. All right, there is no new business. There is no further discussion. There is no deliberations, so make a motion to adjourn.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.